bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum.
Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Scholdice, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, I'll answer listener questions. Hello and welcome to Everyday Musicality. I'm trying something a little different today. I am totally unscripted. That's right. Usually when I produce these podcasts, I want to make sure that I'm being very clear in the language that I'm using. And so typically I will script episodes in advance. But today, I haven't had a chance to do that, so I'm just going to attempt to do this episode off the cuff. And it's a fitting one for me to try to do that because this is a listener Q&A episode. You may remember that in some of the previous episodes, I asked you to send me your questions. If you had a question about MLT or maybe something about a challenge you've been having in implementing MLT in your teaching, I asked you to send me those questions. So today I have a nice batch of questions that I'll be responding to. Let's get right into it. The first question comes from Jennifer Patrick, who sent me her email after listening to the episodes I recorded on music aptitude and music aptitude tests. Jennifer wrote, "Thank you for all of your amazing work. I anxiously await each podcast release. The most recent episodes about aptitude testing prompted me to think about who should see the results of those tests. Some background. I work at a small private school with very involved parents and have been considering using aptitude testing for the first time. Our school uses an achievement test for all grade levels for reading, language arts, math, and science 3 times per year, and the results are shared and discussed with students, teachers, and parents. Students set goals to grow their scores each testing period and are publicly recognized for scores indicating high achievement and for high growth. With that said, would you share music aptitude scores with students and parents? And if not, how would you explain to them your rationale for not sharing, especially in an environment like this?" Well, thank you, Jennifer, for sending in your question. To answer the first part of your question, typically I would not share aptitude scores with students or parents. That is a test that I administer just for me so that I can provide appropriate instruction for each student, so that I can make sure I'm meeting their needs in relation to their music aptitude and can help each student experience success. I also wouldn't share the results with parents because, unlike achievement, students have no control over their aptitude. Right? In response to achievement, they could set a goal for a certain period of time, and then they can work to achieve that goal. That makes sense. But it doesn't work that way for aptitude. And I might explain it to the parents in that way. If a parent was aware that I gave the test and questioned me about it, I might simply explain the difference between music aptitude and music achievement and explain the purpose for why I administered that test so that I could provide individualized instruction for each student. And I would simply leave it at that for the parents. Another reason I wouldn't choose to share the scores with students and parents is it's way too easy to misunderstand or misinterpret why we're giving the test. It's too easy to look at it as a way of judging who is musical and who is not. So I just don't want to go down that road. Now, occasionally, I might choose to share a score with a parent if their student tested exceptionally high. And I might do that as a way of encouraging that parent to keep their student involved in music, to continue providing opportunities for them to engage with music. And I might simply share that, for example, if it's a parent-teacher conference night and the parent comes into the music room to visit with me, I might just happen to mention, hey, I give this music aptitude test. It's to help me teach each student better, but I also wanted to let you know that your student scores exceptionally high, meaning they have a lot of potential to be successful in music. So you might want to keep them engaged in music, or maybe consider instrument lessons or children's choir or something like that. That would be the one instance in which I might share aptitude test results with a parent. All right, moving on to the next question, which is from listener Zoe Winter. Zoe wrote me, I have a son who's about 2 years old now. I would love to hear from you some experiences and ideas on incorporating MLT in everyday life at home. How did you encourage your daughter to engage musically? What are your tips on making it fun and self-directed or open-ended? How did you manage to fit music in a crazy timetable without making it feel hectic? What are some everyday situations that encourage improvisation? Maybe you even have personal musical play ideas or favorites you'd like to share. These are just a few questions that arise. Even if you don't have an answer to all of these, I would just be curious about your experience as an MLT mom. Good question, Zoe. Well, first I'll mention that, frankly, as an MLT mom, I sometimes felt pressure when my daughter, who is now 5.5, I sometimes felt pressure when she was younger, like I should be singing to her all the time, and I have to have a plan for including all the different tonalities and meters, and I have to think of ways to engage her like I would if I was teaching an early childhood music class. And I had to just step back and realize, as long as we were doing music at some times in the home, she was going to be just fine, that she was going to hear a lot of music, and I didn't have to stress about making it super structured or super planned. I think the biggest way that you can make music with your child at home is just to sing tunes, right? Just going about your everyday life, just sing a little tune, sing in a few tonalities or a few meters. Sometimes it felt hard for me to think of tunes in the moment, like I had to think of the perfect tune for that day. So I just had a core handful of little tunes that I liked. One, for example, that I sang a lot for her was Beth Bolton's Australia. I just liked that little tune, so I would just sing it sometimes. Also, make up tunes. Sometimes I would just make up tunes about whatever we happen to be doing in everyday life. For example, when she was just starting on solid foods, I started singing one day about her oatmeal cereal. It was something like, oatmeal cereal, oatmeal cereal, oatmeal cereal is yummy. Oatmeal cereal, oatmeal cereal, oatmeal cereal is yummy. And I would just sing that to her as I was feeding her, and just see how she would respond. That leads me to another point. In engaging with your own young child at home, just sing a little bit. Sing a tune or sing a phrase or two of a tune, and then stop and be quiet and just watch and listen to how they respond. Do they respond through movement? Do they respond through any vocalizations? Does it seem like it's related to what you're doing, or is it not related? So leave that space and just see what your child does. There have been a few studies. One was Christina Hornbach's dissertation. She's another Gimmel faculty member. Her dissertation found the importance of silence and the different kinds of silence that can be used in engaging young children musically. And it's in leaving that silence that we allow space for children to interact musically. We provide opportunities for them to vocalize and for them to make music. And then we can respond off of what they do. I do believe back in, sorry, I'm doing this off the top of my head today, but I did a series of episodes on informal music guidance. And I believe when I had Allison Reynolds on the podcast, I think she mentioned Christina's research and also Wendy Valerio, another Gimmel faculty member. I think I remember her talking about Wendy's research, mentioning the importance of silence. So I will link to both of those studies in the show notes, and also to the chat with Allison Reynolds, another Gimmel faculty member. So just sing a little bit to your child and then just shut up and see how they respond. And if they vocalize, play off of that. Just like with language, you have a young child who isn't speaking in correct words yet, I'm using air quotes, correct words, you don't speak to them, and if they just babble back to you, ignore them, right? You engage with them. You might imitate the sounds that they made. You might take the sounds that they made and interpret them as having meaning. Like if the child was going, ba, 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 you might say, oh, Baba, you want your bottle? Baba, bottle. So if you sing a little bit and you leave some space and the child vocalizes back to you, you might interpret their vocalization and put it into the context in which you were singing. You might literally echo back the sounds that they made so they can hear their own sounds. You might take the sounds that they made and incorporate it into what you're doing musically. And that will just be ways of further extending the musicking using the sounds that they're making. Another fun thing I like to do with my daughter was to use her toys to elicit musical play. For example, we had a little bead maze, the thing that has the wires with the beads on them, and you can kind of move them up and down the hills or around the curves, that kind of thing. So I would sing a little tune like Beth Bolton's Australia. Ba-dum bum ba-da-dum ba-dum bum ba-da-dum ba-dum bum ba-da-dum ba-dum bum ba-dum, and then I might take a bead and work it up to the top of the bead maze. Ba-dum, and then drop it down to the bottom of the bead maze, and just use that toy as a way to see if I could prompt a musical response from her. And she did several times. She would start vocalizing on the resting tone. Actually, I think I caught it on video one time with that very song. I'll see if I can hunt down that video and insert some audio into the podcast. Okay, well, hopefully I was able to find that audio and put it in. If not, I apologize. I'll see if I can hunt that video down and put it on my YouTube channel at some point. So again, using toys, your child's own toys can be great for eliciting music play and vocalization. Puppets are another good one, or using their stuffies, any toys at all that you can find and you can incorporate rhythmic chanting or singing to go along with. All right, thanks Zoe for those great questions. Let's move along to the next questions, which come from Amy Marone. Amy writes, I've been experimenting more with teaching songs how you teach them on your podcast, starting with doing pauses, breathing, and singing the resting tone together. I think this email from Amy came after my musicianship episodes that I did at the beginning of 2021. In those episodes, I talked about things like teaching a tune by rote and incorporating things like audiating and singing the resting tone of the tune. I'll link to those episodes in the show notes as well. Back to Amy's email. Amy says, in regards to doing the pauses, breathing, and singing the resting tone, I was wondering if there are any rules about when to pause for that exercise. Obviously, some places are trickier than others to audiate the resting tone, but I was wondering if there's anything I should gravitate toward or stay away from doing. All right, in response to that question, Amy, you can stop anywhere you want. And you make a good point that yes, some places are going to be more challenging than others to audiate and sing that resting tone. So maybe when your students are new to this activity, you might want to pause in more predictable places like at the ends of phrases or maybe after half of the song. And then once your students are more familiar with this activity, you might start to stop in those trickier places, like in the middle of phrases. Maybe you stop at a wide interval from the resting tone. And also, you might consider that in terms of the difficulty level of when you're stopping, especially when you're having students audiate and sing the resting tone in solo. So, thinking then just in terms about where you're stopping in the song and how easy or difficult that will make it for each student to find and sing the resting tone. My only thing that I would say to not do in a resting tone activity like this is to not substitute the resting tone that you're having the kids sing for the resting tone in the song. So if you happen to stop at a place where the next pitch would be the resting tone, have the kids sing back the resting tone and then supply the resting tone from the song, just so it doesn't get confusing. Other than that, feel free to stop anywhere you want based on the level of challenge your students need. Another question from Amy was, also, I just wanted to say that it meant a lot to me to hear about how you both kind of stumbled upon MLT and that's how you got your start. That is me. I took an early childhood course at my alma mater for fun and fell in love with it. I'm just in the very beginnings, so it can be overwhelming at times. Currently, I'm at home with my 1 and 3-year-olds, so I practice with them, and I do Zoom sessions with one of my friend's 2-year-olds. Eventually, I'd like to expand my business to in-person sessions when I feel it's safe. Which leads me to another question that would maybe be good for your Q&A if you haven't done it yet. Her question is, what other jobs or opportunities are there for early childhood music using MLT other than having one studio? Great question, Amy. I think this is a question that a lot of folks have when they're really excited about early childhood music, but the idea of starting your own business seems daunting. Maybe you don't have your own space where you would be able to host the classes. So there are different ways that you could get started. I'm not sure, you'd have to work out pay. I'm not going to necessarily address pay because that's a whole different issue where you would, arrange to get payment from parents, but you could also get a start with just doing some volunteer classes, which might generate some interest. So one way that you might start to dabble in classes without having your own studio or business would be to inquire with your local library. Our local library here has different offerings for children. They have story time types of classes that involve some music and movement. You might approach your local library and say, hey, I would love to do an early childhood music class for young children in the area. Might you be willing to partner with me and allow me to teach that class here and bring in community members to take the class? So you might be able to work out some sort of arrangement. Like I said, maybe at first it's just sort of an experimental thing for volunteer to generate interest, and then you could start to work out a payment schedule. And that would just be something you'd have to work out with the library in terms of what they would allow you to do using their space if you're going to be collecting payments. But that's one thought, is your local library. You might check out some other local businesses in your area to see if they would be open to partnering and letting you use their space. When my daughter was 1.5 years, I took her to a kinder music class, and I took her to that class because it was the only early childhood music class offering that was real nearby to where we live. The program I direct at Eastern Michigan University is about 45 minutes away from our home, so I wasn't interested in driving my 1.5-year-old 45 minutes. But the Steinway Piano Gallery, 10 minutes down the road, had a kinder music teacher who would teach there. And so she used a room in their space. She brought in all of her own materials, but that was the space where she could hold her classes. And I believe they were advertised through the Steinway website in our area. So that's an option. Check out a place like that. Maybe it's a music store, a local music supply store. Maybe it's something like a fitness or sports center or a community center. Sometimes places like that will host youth classes. Maybe something through your local city organizations. You might check into that to see if they would be willing to partner with you, to let you use some of your local city space or community center space to hold your classes. So you could explore that. And then another option that I've seen some people doing is outdoor classes. And this lately has been necessitated by COVID because it's allowed people to meet more safely. But you could hold some outdoor classes, and this doesn't have to be a whole long session. It could just be like a pop-up. A friend of mine, Sadie Pincus, I saw recently, she's been posting on social media that she's been having little pop-up parent in me or adult in me music classes. You don't have to commit to like a whole, 8 or 10 week session. It's just times when a parent, a guardian could just pop in with their child for a 1 week. They could come multiple weeks. And that's just a fun way to generate some interest. And you could build that into a program later. So you could do those pop-up classes outdoors, weather permitting, and you would have a little less restriction in terms of needing to find a space for that. You would just find an outdoor space, maybe at a local park or something like that. So those are just my thoughts. But of course, I haven't done these things myself. I've always taught early childhood music through existing organizations like a university or through a local symphony orchestra organization. So if anyone listening has other suggestions on opportunities for teaching early childhood music other than having your own studio, please feel free to email in and share them, and I'll report back on a future episode. The email is everydaymusicality@gmail.com. Okay, next we are on to a question from Ryan Blunt. He writes in, I have a question for you in the podcast. When completing an LSA page, does every student receive the easy pattern no matter their aptitude? Can I give the students with average and high aptitude just the medium and difficult patterns respectively? I'd love some advice on great LSA practices. So first of all, in terms of LSA practices, if you haven't already, check out episode 27. Back in that episode, I gave an intro to learning sequence activities, so there's a helpful overview there, and I might sort of touch on this question a little bit in that episode. But to answer your questions, can I give the students with average and high aptitude just the medium and difficult patterns respectively? Well, yeah, you can do anything you want in your classroom. This is where I think some people get tripped up on incorporating MLT because they just get very hung up on following the rules. And I have to do this the right way. I'm using air quotes that you can't see. In fact, the Gordon Institute for Music Learning puts out a publication called the ADIA, the Gimmel ADIA, and that has articles on research and practical applications of MLT. And I actually published in there a study with my co-author about the Gimmel mentoring program that we piloted and that's now offered through Gimmel each year. We did a research study on the participants in that Gimmel mentoring program, and one of the findings when we looked at their experiences and their struggles in that first year of using MLT in their teaching after taking a professional development course through Gimmel, one of the findings was that they were very hung up at first on following the rules and wanting to do things exactly as Ed Gordon said to do it or exactly as they had been taught in their levels course. And part of what was helpful in having a mentor for those participants was that it helped them learn to think through the reasons behind the rules and then decide if they still wanted to do something different or not. And it gave them a feeling of permission to break those rules. So you can do anything you want in your classroom. Heck, there's a lot of MLT teachers who think of themselves as MLT teachers and call themselves MLT teachers who don't teach learning sequence activities. In fact, I think there is a fellow elementary general faculty member who doesn't teach learning sequence activities. I don't know if they admit that when they teach a course, but I believe they don't teach learning sequence activities anymore. So you can do anything you want. You can teach LSAs, you cannot teach LSAs. You can teach LSAs how you want. The key is thinking through why you're choosing to do things the way you want to do them. So yeah, you can give students with average and high aptitude just the medium and difficult patterns respectively. And you might think, the why. Why might you want to do that? Well, you might want to be more efficient. You might want to skip those students on the easy pattern or skip your high aptitude students on the easy and the medium just to get them to their target difficulty level. But another thing you want to think about is what are you giving up in making that change? And I think what you give up there is the richness of the pattern vocabulary that your higher aptitude students would have been developing. So you can read about this in Gordon's writings. The idea of giving everybody the easy pattern first and then working your way through is that your higher aptitude students don't just learn more difficult patterns, they learn more patterns. And that's part of keeping them challenged and engaged, is that you not only give them a more difficult pattern vocabulary, but a larger pattern vocabulary to interact with. Another thing to think about is the fact that maybe a high aptitude student is going to get the patterns right on their first try. Conversely, I've had plenty of students with lower aptitude who need multiple attempts just to get the easy pattern. They might need multiple attempts in teaching mode and sometimes multiple attempts in evaluation mode just to get the easy pattern. So if we're talking in terms of equity and opportunities to interact with patterns, it makes sense that if we're going to give, for example, a student with lower aptitude multiple opportunities to interact with the easy pattern, it would make sense to give the students with higher aptitude multiple opportunities to interact with different patterns. So that's how I justify it in my mind. And also, if you're thinking that, somehow students are going to notice who's getting which pattern, and they're going to notice that it's not fair, or they're going to notice that somebody's getting a harder one and somebody's getting an easier one, rest assured, most of the time, they don't notice. If you're teaching LSAs well, and you're mixing up the patterns, and you're not just doing the easy pattern over and over and over again, lots of students all in a row, you should be giving enough variety that they're not going to notice who's getting the same pattern multiple times versus who's getting, different patterns. Also remember that it's not always obvious which pattern is the difficult pattern because it's based on audiation, right? In a previous episode, I talked about the very first rhythm learning sequence activity page where it's in duple meter and the easy is ba 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 ba. So if it's written in 4/4, it would be 4 pairs of eighth notes. The difficult pattern would be ba 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 ba. So if it's written in 4/4, it would be 4 quarter notes. And traditionally, we think of quarter notes as being easier than eighth notes, right? Because it's easier to see on the page. But it's actually more difficult to audiate because there's more space between the notes. And so if you're chanting those patterns for students, they're not likely to notice which one's the easier one and which one's the more difficult. But good question, Ryan. And I will hopefully be doing in the future a deep dive episode into LSAs where we really get into the nitty gritty. Maybe even I can have a guest or two on to hash through that with me. Also, while I'm thinking of it, I mentioned the Gimel Idea. If you are a member of Gimel, you have access to all the issues of that journal online in the members only section. And in the same issue where we published our study on the Gimel mentoring program, I also wrote a practical thought piece on breaking the rules and evading the MLT police. That's sometimes a term people will joke about is, if they choose to break the rules, the MLT police are going to break down their door and arrest them or something. But I wrote this article about how you can teach any way that you want to, but if you're going to call yourself an MLT practitioner, you need to be always thinking about the core tenets of MLT and whether the alterations you're making or the rules that you're breaking still align with those core tenets. So you might want to check out that latest issue of the Gimel Idea where I talk through this idea of like a cost-benefit analysis where you look at what are the things I might gain by making a change. Why do I want to make this change? And then what are the things I might be sacrificing in making that change? And it helps you weigh whether it's worth it or not. So you might want to check out that article if you're thinking about making alterations to how you teach LSAs or anything else MLT-wise. Just a few more questions here. The next one is from Dylan Walters. Dylan writes, I've been nerding out to your podcast for a few months now during my last semester of student teaching in California. I was barely introduced to MLT last year and I cannot get enough of it. Learning more than just major and duple is way more exciting for my future students and myself. I find a deep drive to learn more about an approach I wish I would have experienced so that I could audiate better than I can currently. I'm now applying for jobs and talking to schools about my teaching philosophy and Gordon's approach during the interview, but I'm worried about cross-pollinating rhythmic solfege into MLT if it is based on how the music is read instead of heard like Gordon's. So Dylan's first question is, if a music program I'm applying to has a well-established Kodai rhythmic solfege, is it possible to cross-pollinate MLT with other rhythmic solfege if it's not based on how it sounds? So Dylan's asking if a place uses a syllable system that's based on notation rather than audiation, what do I do, essentially, right? So a few things. One is, speaking specifically of Kodai, I actually know of some Kodai teachers who are starting to tweak the syllables so they're essentially beat function based. So traditionally, the syllables used in Kodai instruction have been a ta is a quarter note and tt is a pair of eighth notes. So if I was chanting 2 eighth notes and a quarter note, I might be chanting ti ti ta ti ti ta. But there are actually some Kodai teachers who have started to use ta essentially as the macro beat. So instead of ti ti ta ti ti ta, it would be ta ti ta ta ti ta, so that ta is always landing on the macro beat. I think that is an excellent compromise. So if your district uses Kodai, you might experiment with that, and you might talk to your colleagues about that possibility of using beat function-based Kodai syllables and why that might benefit students. Another idea, frankly, I'm just going to be honest here, is to shut your door and teach. Now, I had the luxury of never having an elementary music teaching job where they told me I had to use certain syllables. But if there's certain syllables used by other teachers in your district and no one is checking up on you to make sure you're using those syllables, if it were me, I would just teach the syllables that I believed in and just shut my door and teach. And then what I might do is later on, when they're going to be moving on to a new teacher, like say when they move on to instrumental music in, 5th or 6th grade or whenever that happens, you might then plan a transition. So for example, in my teaching, students started instrumental music in 5th grade. And so at the end of 4th grade, we would always do a couple weeks of what I called 5th grade boot camp, where I would say, okay, next year you're going to be in instrumental music with Miss So-and-so, and they might talk about music in some different ways than what we've been doing. So I'm going to teach you really fast how to translate what we've been doing in here together to what Miss So-and-so is going to be doing with you next year. So there might be some activities or games that we would play where we would practice translating the beat function-based rhythm syllables to the 1E and a 2E and a system. Basically, we did it just like you would do in generalization, where they're learning to put the do's and the do days to the patterns they hear on ba. But instead of that, it would just be hearing patterns with the do's and do days and learning to translate it to the 1E and a 2E andas. So we would practice, I'd model, okay, we've been saying do day do to day to do. Next year, that'll be 1 and 2, 3 and a 4. And we would just practice adding those 1E and a syllables to it. We would try reading the rhythmic patterns we'd already read with beat function syllables in the 1E and a 2E and a system, and it just took a little bit of time. And the cool thing is, if students are audiating, they can make a change to a new syllable system very easily if they're audiating. So that would be my biggest advice, is to shut your door and teach, and then be mindful of when you're going to need to prepare them for a different teacher or a different learning setting. Next, Dylan also asks, is it selfish for a newbie teacher to ask for diverse tonalities and meters and Gordon solfege as a non-negotiable? My answer to that is, it depends on how much you want the job, right? And what's more important to you, getting the job or giving an ultimatum, essentially, right? So, that's up to you. If there's a lot of jobs in your area and you feel confident that you're going to get one and you want to say, essentially, I'm not taking this job unless I can teach in this way that I believe, have at it. Good for you. I've been in the job market when things were a little more challenging, and so I don't know if I would have been brave enough, frankly, to, in an interview as a newbie teacher, to say my way or the highway, right? So I might advocate for more of trying to feel out the lay of the land in the interview. And rather than laying out non-negotiables, I might ask them, what are your expectations? Do you have requirements in terms of what approach you want teachers to use or what syllables? Can I see your curriculum? And you might look and see, are the syllables dictated? Because my experience has been, I've been in 3 different public school districts in Michigan, and none of them required me to teach a certain syllable system. Yes, they had curricula. Yes, there were times when I didn't necessarily agree with the sequencing of the curricula, which, if I'm being honest, I taught the way I believed in teaching and just, trusted that no one was going to call me out on it, which they never did, right? That's like the blessing and curse of being the music teacher, frankly, is a lot of times people don't care what you're doing. Sad, but true. So the upside of that is if you're making changes to the curriculum in terms of what you believe, you're probably not going to get in trouble for it. And as long as everything's shaking out in the end, right? I don't believe in teaching my kindergarten students quarter notes and eighth notes and how to read them in kindergarten. But they need to know that by the time they leave the program. So as long as they're getting those skills eventually, I take leeway with how things happen along the way. Also, you mentioned diverse tonalities and meters as a non-negotiable. That's the kind of thing where, frankly, you can do whatever you want in your classroom, right? Unless you are in a super prescriptive place where they're going to say, here's the songs they're going to teach, here's the activities and the assessments you're going to use. Most jobs, you have the choice of the repertoire you're going to use and when you're going to teach it and how you're going to teach it. And so I wouldn't even bother to ask about diverse tonalities and meters because that's something you can easily influence as you're choosing your repertoire. You could be following your district's curriculum in terms of the benchmarks for each grade level, but you could be doing it with repertoire that includes a variety of tonalities and meters. So that's what I would say, is to treat the interview less as a laying out of what you will and won't do, and more of a trying to feel out how prescriptive the district is going to be and get a sense for whether you feel like it's a place where you could teach in a way that you believe. That being said, if personally I was interviewing for a job where they were going to require me to teach in a way that I didn't believe in, or to teach in a way that wouldn't enable me to do the things that now I know are really important for kids, and in terms of sequential learning, I don't think I would want that job. And so, I might look for other opportunities. And again, this goes back to how easy or difficult the job market is in your area, whether there's a lot of open jobs right now or whether there's not. But that's a decision you're going to have to make for yourself. So Dylan, thank you for your great questions, and I wish you the best of luck in your job search. I hope you find a place that really feels like a good fit for you. And always remember, your first year or two are going to be incredibly hard. You're going to feel like you stink at it as being a teacher every single day. Just know it gets better. The general kind of rule of thumb I've heard from other music teachers is it takes about 3 years to feel like a program is yours, to feel like you know the kids, they know you, they're starting to develop some skills that you hoped that they were going to have, and you just really start to feel better about the job in year 3 or year 4. So hang in there, Dylan. It will get easier, and have fun. Let's see. Last question is from Rachel Russell. She writes, I've taken all 3 ORF levels and have dove deeply into John Feyerabend's teaching materials. I originally thought MLT was boring and dry. All that started to change when I started to use Marilyn Lowe's music moves for piano. Once I started learning and using music moves for piano, I noticed that I was audiating tonic and dominant harmonic functions so much better. Aural theory was the bane of my existence in college, as it was for so many of us. Since then, I've been on a mission to learn more about MLT and how to incorporate it. I took one of the online courses offered over the summer and found that to be helpful. I would like to take the official levels courses in 2022, but I'm so intimidated by them. I just don't know if I can handle the heavy demands on my musicality. I've been working on becoming more familiar with music in various meters and tonalities, as well as some basic MLT teaching ideas. Would it be possible to do a podcast on what knowledge and skills a music teacher should have to have the smoothest learning experience possible during levels? During my ORF levels, we did modes and unusual meters, and I was just a mess. I felt like a musical failure in that regard. Now, after learning about MLT, I know that I was never acculturated to those types of music. Yes, I am so glad, Rachel, that you acknowledge that, because that is really necessary. Just like young children learn sequentially by first developing a listening vocabulary and then starting to babble musically and play around with those sounds, adults need that too. We need to have lots of chances to hear these different tonalities and meters and to play around with them, to mess around with them using our audiation, not notation. So I'm glad that you're realizing that you need to give yourself grace and be patient, because it will get easier the more you are acculturated. Really quickly before I answer Rachel's question, just for people who are less familiar with GIML and the opportunities they offer, every summer there are in-person professional development levels courses. They're referred to commonly as PDLCs. They're 2 weeks long, and you just come and you basically live MLT for 2 weeks. And you just learn about it, you apply it, you make music in the different tonalities and meters. So those are the PDLCs. Also, last year, GIML started offering 1-week intro courses that are online, and they're going to be offering those again this summer. So you might check out those opportunities to see if any of those would be of interest to you. So back to Rachel's question about how to have a smooth learning experience during levels. I would say the biggest thing is, before you go do a levels course, take the opportunity to learn through your ears. GIA has a tonal and rhythmic skills development CD. I'm not sure if that's the exact title, but I'll link to it in the show notes. Just get that CD and listen to it. It's got some tunes in the different tonalities and meters, and it's got all kinds of pattern tracks in major, minor, duple, and triple, some without syllables, some with syllables. So I would just get that CD and I would just play it. Put it on the background, get acculturated, and then start to echo the patterns. So in the tonal and rhythm pattern tracks, there's space for you to respond. So I would start with the neutral syllable tracks, just like your students learn through oral. Just listen to the patterns and echo them back. Then go on to the syllable tracks and echo them with syllables. Once you're feeling a little more comfortable, then I would say maybe try playing the tracks that don't have syllables and seeing if you can perform the patterns back with the syllables, because that really is the key. You don't have to worry about coming to a PDLC audiating in every tonality and meter. There is musicianship time every day of those courses to help you with that. I don't think any GIML PDLC instructor expects you to come, able to audiate and improvise in Phrygian or in, uneven, unpaired meter. We're going to get you there. That's what the course is for. But what I do see as something that can really hinder people's progress in a GIML PDLC is if they struggle to make up patterns in major, minor, duple, and triple, and to use syllables correctly. If you can come to a PDLC able to improvise some tonic and dominant patterns in major and minor with solfege, and if you can improvise some 4-beat patterns in duple and triple meter with the beat function-based syllables, you will be rockin'. So much of the time in those PDLCs, at least for elementary general music, is spent on pattern instruction, on how to teach pattern instruction, how to teach learning sequence activities. And if you come to the PDLC and you aren't comfortable making up patterns in duple and triple, major and minor, and with using syllables, you can't really focus on the skills of teaching pattern instruction because you're just struggling so hard to make up patterns and apply the correct syllables. So if I could give one piece of advice, that would be it. Just immerse yourself in patterns and syllables leading up to the PDLC, and you should have no problem at all. Another suggestion would be to get Music Play, the original Music Play, because that comes with a CD. If you would like some more opportunities to be immersed in unusual tonalities and meters, you could play that Music Play CD, the original Music Play one. Also, don't forget, I have, if you look back in the previous episodes, I have 4 different episodes on 4 different tonalities, Mixolydian, Dorian, I lied, only 3, Mixolydian, Dorian, and Phrygian, but I'll be doing a Lydian soon, and then we'll go on to Aeolian and Locrian, so you could check out those episodes for musicianship in those tonalities, and who knows, maybe I'll get into some meter episodes as well. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone who sent in questions. I know this ended up being a bit long of an episode, but I hope it was enjoyable to get to hear the kinds of things that other people are wondering about and to hear my thoughts. And if you have questions, please feel free to email them to everydaymusicality@gmail.com, and I would be happy to answer those in a future episode, either a Q&A episode, or maybe I could come up with a recurring feature in other episodes where I do a little listener question portion. Well, that being said, I think for a little while now, my family is going to be done with school this week. My husband's going to be done teaching, and my daughter's going to be done with school later this week. So I think I'm going to take a little bit of time off to spend some time with them. And now that my husband and I are vaccinated, we're going to be visiting with family a bit. And so I'm going to be putting the podcast on hiatus for a little while, but I will be back in August. I've got some ideas for new episodes coming your way. And if you have any suggestions for kinds of episodes that you might like to see, or guests that you might like to hear from on the podcast, anything at all, please pass them along to me at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to put out some episodes that would help you in the specific ways that you're looking for. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day.